Hello, my name is Brian Gerard, and this video describes how to distribute psychological first aid to persons affected by disaster. The persons who do this important work are the volunteer members of the Disaster Watch intervention team. This slide is from a United Nations website, whose link is shown at the top of the slide if you want to learn more. It shows worldwide disasters as of December 2022. There are 40 disasters on this map, and this is typical. On average, there are over 300 disasters a year worldwide. On the left side of this screen are some common hazards that cause disaster. And here we see floods, earthquakes, fires, hazards that we are very familiar with that cause disaster. However, it's important to note that disasters are not inevitable. They tend to occur when a community is not prepared to handle it. And this quote by Mizutori describes this. Disasters happen when a community is not appropriately resourced or organized to withstand the impact, and whose population is vulnerable because of poverty, exclusion, or socially disadvantaged in some way. The implication is that a disaster can be prevented or mitigated by communities being prepared, reducing their risks, and becoming more resilient. This is what psychological first aid does. It helps people to become more resilient. It's important to note that a community can be swiftly overwhelmed by a disaster, such as an earthquake, a flood, a fire, and this ends up filling shelters with more victims than mental health resources can assist. This is why psychological first aid is important. It's any resource that you can read or watch or listen to that provides helpful advice on how to cope with disaster-related stress. For example, the recent war in Ukraine placed over 17 million persons in need of assistance. That's a lot. And in 2022, worldwide, more than 247 million persons were affected by disasters. This video is going to explain how you can help provide psychological first aid to persons like this. The Disastershock website contains two types of psychological first aid: reading materials and videos. An example of reading materials is the manual Disastershock: How to Cope with the Emotional Stress of a Major Disaster. This booklet is available in 30 languages on the Disastershock website. It contains 3 sections, each with practical how-to advice on coping with disaster-related stress. Part 1 deals with adults, Part 2 with children, and Part 3 provides videos and additional internet resources. Another example of reading materials are our tip sheets. These are one-page downloadable sheets with practical suggestions for lowering stress. And these are also available in many languages. A reasonable question to ask about reading materials is, can reading some psychological first aid actually help someone? The answer is yes. Here are 10 studies that compared counseling or therapy with reading psychological first aid. That is, persons who were suffering from various forms of stress either received in-person counseling and therapy or they were required to read some psychological first aid. The results showed that psychological first aid was found to be as effective as seeing a mental health professional. The Disastershock website also contains arts-based recovery strategies, as well as videos on topics like music therapy, teaching children to relax using deep breathing, and cognitive therapy strategies for handling stress. This next section describes the 4 steps in distributing disaster shock materials. On the home page on the Disastershock website, if you click on How to Distribute Disaster Shock, you will see the 4 steps that are essential for carrying this out. Step 1 outlines the 4 steps. The first is to decide on the disaster you want to intervene with and to learn about it. Second, to read strategies for distribution. These are designed to help you identify a specific person to whom you can send an email asking for their help in distributing the disaster shock materials. The third step involves designing your email using some templates that we have. And the 4th step is recording the email that you sent so that we can keep track of it. So here is step 1 in detail. And this involves identifying the disaster you want to help with and learning some basic information about the country and its main languages. By going to our Disastershock website, and this is the URL for it. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you will see where it says Disaster Watch List. And if you click on that, you will go to this page, which lists flags of countries where there's a disaster. And below each flag is the name of the type of disaster that they're having. And for the sake of discussion, we're going to focus on the floods in Benin as an illustration. If you click on Benin floods, you will get a description of that disaster. And this description comes from the United Nations website earlier referred to. In reading about these floods, what I discovered is that 27 municipalities out of 77 were flooded. Well, that's about a third of the country. That is a lot. I then tried to gather some further information. I found a map showing Benin, and you can see it's next to Nigeria and on one side, and Togo and Ghana on the other. Also on Wikipedia, I was able to read a bit more about Benin. This is a country I was not familiar with. It's in West Africa, and the official language of Benin is French. It's important to know the official language because we want to find out if we have resources for that language. And in point of fact, we do. We have a French disaster shock booklet, and we have a French disaster shock tip sheet. So knowing that will be important as we go forward with developing our email. So step 2 involves reading the strategies for distribution. So when you think about distributing disaster shock materials, you have to think about a number of things. You have to think about the level at which you want to make your intervention. Are you going to focus on a town or a city? Maybe it was a limited disaster, or a county or a state or the whole country. Maybe the whole country's been affected. So you have to think about which level you're going to intervene at. You have to think about what organization you might contact. Are they local, regional, or national? If they're national, they'll have a broader reach. You should think about personal contact. Do you by chance know anybody who knows anybody in that country? Then that's helpful. You can make a more personal contact. You can also consider professional affiliation. For example, I've been a professor most of my life, and so when I send emails asking for help to universities, I find I get a higher chance of getting somebody to respond because they feel that they're working with a colleague. Similarly, if you're a high school student, there may be a high school student organization in that country that you could contact. And this helps you get a result. In addition, you need to think about where to send the email. You need to think about whether to send it to school districts or government departments or universities, or maybe a mayor's office or religious organizations, or to politicians, or to emergency services such as the Red Cross, or perhaps to Rotary clubs or Lions clubs, or to use social media. You can use any and all of these, but you need to make a start somewhere. So for this example in Benin, I decided to be a detective and try to figure it out. And you really have to be a detective in doing this part. Step 2 is the most difficult part of distribution. And you have to kind of figure out who can you send the email to who would be most likely to respond. So I decided to focus on government departments, and I looked for the Department of Health, and I just typed into my web browser Department of Health, and up it came in French, Ministère de la Santé. I happen to know a little bit of French, so I knew that that means health ministry. And here is the picture of the director of the health ministry. His first name is Benjamin, and I can read a little bit more that he has a doctorate in medicine. So that was helpful information. I also found on that web page an email address. This is critical because unless you have an email address, how are you going to send your message? So that was a very important step. Step 3 is to design your email message. And you can go on the Disastershock website to look at step 3 sample emails. And so in the sample emails, there is a general email with an all-purpose email that you can adapt to send to someone. And if you want to send to a school district, we have a separate example that focuses on schools and references our school disaster shock manual, how schools can cope with emotional stress of a major disaster, the manual for principals and teachers. So I started with the general email, and here you have to add some things in. You have to add in the name of the person you're sending it to and the name of their organization. You have to address dear and then their name. And you have to name the disaster. So we're deeply sad to learn of you name the disaster affecting your country. You need to look through the Disastershock website and look to see if there are any language translations that might be useful to that country. So here we know that a French translation is available. And so I would type in French translation. And finally, you would put your name at the bottom, and underneath it, Disastershock Global Response Team, which is the name of the overall team that is doing this work. You should also note that there are hyperlinks that are embedded in the general email. There's one for English translation, one for tip sheets, and one for the Disastershock website. And if you click on these, you're taken straight away to, in this example, the English Disastershock website. Over here are the tip sheets. If you click on that, you go to the tip sheets, and you can see that we have them in many different languages. The nice thing about the hyperlinks is that allows the person getting the email to go swiftly to see the materials. However, we need to do this for French. If you already know how to make hyperlinks, you can go directly to step 4. For my Benin email, I want to hyperlink the French Disastershock manual. So I would type into the email French translation, and now I have to go about developing a hyperlink for it. So in order to do this, I need to go to the Disastershock download site and scroll down to the French translation and click on it. And then I need to copy the link that links to the French booklet. So once you've done that, you need to go to the page. For some of you, it'll be in Word. On a Mac computer, you'll be in Pages. You go to where you're actually working on the email, and then you click on, you make sure that you have highlighted French translation, and then you go to Insert, which opens up Link, and then Link will open up this window shown here. You click on existing file or web page, because when you put in at the address section the link, you're linking to a web page. Then you paste the link that you copied from the download site in here, and you click OK. And at that point, you have your French translation hyperlinked. So here is my email. I've addressed it to the Minister of Health. I have his name, and I've added some words here that the tip sheets are in French, and I've hyperlinked French translation. So let's do a check here. Yes, there it is. So this is the email. At this point, I would send it. And step 4 is to record your email so we can keep track of who has sent what to whom. And here is an example of a disaster watch intervention period in near end of August. And in September, I had sent some emails to universities to asking for help in making a Pashto translation for the Afghanistan earthquake. You could see that I haven't had many positive responses. I did the same thing around the same time period for the Pakistan flooding, trying to get somebody to help me make an Urdu translation. Urdu is the main language in Pakistan. And I did get some people helping me. So after you have recorded your email, you may find you don't get a response right away or at all. That's quite common because you can't tell what's happened at the other end. And when there's been a disaster, sometimes people aren't checking their emails on a regular basis, but it's important to record this information. Something else to think about, in addition to my sending an email to the health department, would be I discovered there is a Benin Republic Facebook page. So I would send something there and see if they would post my email asking for volunteers to help distribute our materials. There's also a Rotary Club of Benin. And notice that both the Facebook site and the Rotary site are in English. So that says to me that English is probably a second language in Benin. And the nice thing about the Rotary Club, as you can see here, beside the picture of the smiling girl, it says Rotary Club of Benin is a network of over 90 neighbors. So they have 90 members, and several of them can distribute, might be willing to distribute disaster shock materials. Finally, I found a university and noticed that this university information is English. And there is a website, there is an email address that I could send an email to. And looking over the programs that they offer, there's a faculty of social science. So I would send something to the department of that faculty. Maybe somebody in journalism might be interested in helping, and maybe somebody in human resources management. So I'd be thinking about all of those possibilities as well. So I want to talk now about some evidence we have that sending out these kind of emails is helpful. At the start of the Ukraine war, during the month of March, we had started sending out emails, and you can see where there's a blue dot here, that this is where persons started to download to our website because they'd gotten emails telling them that we have these materials. And you can see there's not that many blue dots. A lot of them are in Romania, where one of our Disastershock Global Team members lives and was able to help us with distribution. However, this second map is from August 2021 to August 2022. So it's over a year, but you can see there is a lot more distribution. And the reason there's a lot more distribution is because we sent out a lot more emails during the period between March and August. And so this was an indication to us that we were getting through to folks in the Ukraine and in the countries around the Ukraine where a lot of the refugees were. So I want to thank you for listening to this video. If you have any difficulty in developing your materials, your psychological first aid materials, please feel free to contact me and I'll get in touch with you and give you some assistance. Thank you again for watching this website.